There's a stage in every toxic relationship that you don't notice when it begins, but you feel it deeply when it ends. It doesn't end with shouting, it doesn't end with tears, it ends with silence. You stop wanting to explain, you stop needing to prove your point, you stop caring whether they understand you, you just don't want to continue anymore. And strangely, that silence isn't weakness, it's the very first sign of strength. That's the moment you realize you don't have to win against a narcissist. You just have to stop playing their game. Everything they once used to control you, fear, guilt, self-doubt, suddenly loses its power. They speak, but you're no longer pulled in. They manipulate, but now you can see the structure of the game. When you're truly done playing, the way you speak changes completely. You no longer talk to react, you talk to protect your peace. You no longer need to prove your strength because your calm is your strength. The next part will show you that moment clearly. The moment you stop speaking from pain and start speaking from awareness. That's the true beginning of every conversation with a narcissist you can never lose, because you're no longer in the game. There's rarely a clear sign for the moment you wake up from a manipulative relationship. It doesn't arrive with slammed doors or dramatic breakups. It comes quietly, often during an ordinary conversation when they start blaming you again, twisting the truth or pretending to be hurt. But this time, something inside you doesn't flinch. Your heart doesn't tighten. You no longer feel the urge to react, explain, or defend yourself. You just look at them, calm, silent, and a thought crosses your mind. I don't have to participate in this anymore. That is the moment you're done playing, when you stop reacting and start observing. You realize that all those conversations were never about connection. They were emotional chess games designed to control you through three tools: fear, obligation, and guilt. The more you reacted, the stronger they became. But when you stay silent and see through the pattern, the balance of power starts to shift. At that point, you no longer speak to be understood, you speak to preserve yourself. Your tone slows down, your eyes no longer seek approval, and your inner world becomes so still that they don't know what to do next. They try to provoke old emotions, anger, guilt, pity, but nothing works anymore. And when they can't trigger a reaction, they start to panic, because you've pulled your energy out of the game they once controlled completely. When you're done playing, you no longer try to fix the relationship because you finally understand the problem was never you. You don't need them to change for you to find peace. You just need to hold your boundaries and refuse to be dragged into the emotional chaos again. From that moment on, every interaction carries a new energy. You're not fighting them, you're rising above them. The success of your effort depends on being calm. This is the most important psychological turning point in your healing journey. It isn't about winning, it's about transcendence. You realize you can't make someone truly love, understand, or respect you, but you can choose how you respond to their falsehood. And when you choose silence, calm, and neutrality, you're no longer the one being manipulated. From there, you begin to learn a new language, the language of self-mastery. No more reacting, no more convincing, no more trying to prove that you're the good one. You simply exist, clear, grounded, and free. And once you reach that state, everything changes. Your voice no longer trembles, your eyes no longer fear, and your energy, calm, steady, unbothered, makes the narcissist feel something they've never felt before, a complete loss of control. Because they only know how to manipulate when you're still playing. But when you stop playing, you become a mirror, forcing them to face the emptiness they've been running from all along. When you've gained enough clarity to finally stop reacting, the next step isn't revenge, it's understanding. You have to look deeply into the mechanics of the game the narcissist has been running, because if you don't understand the rules, you'll keep getting pulled back into their emotional chess match without even realizing it. In their world, communication isn't about connection, it's about control. Every word, every look, every reaction from you is data. They observe to measure how much power they still hold. If you get angry, they win. If you explain yourself, they win. If you cry, they win again, because to them your emotions are the fuel that keeps their illusion of worth alive. They exist through your reactions. A narcissist doesn't speak to be understood, they speak to provoke. That's the most important truth to grasp. They don't want facts, they want feelings. They want to see you shaken, confused, and off balance. Every time you lose your composure, they feel like they're winning a game that only they know how to play. These people don't communicate to find solutions. They create conflict to test how much control they still have over you. If you stay gentle, they push harder. If you fight back, they flip the script and play the victim. The more you try to prove your innocence, the more they reinforce their role as the hurt one. It's a closed loop. Every path leads you back to guilt. A narcissist doesn't need your love. They only need your reaction. That's their lifeline. And once you understand that, you begin to see how fragile they truly are beneath the performance. The tools they use to maintain their control can be summed up in 3 letters: fog, fear, obligation, and guilt. They create fear with emotional threats like, if you leave, I'll never survive. They use false obligation through lines like, I've sacrificed so much for you, and they weaponize guilt with phrases such as, you're the only one who can hurt me like this. Each time you believe them, you step back into the fog. That psychological haze where your boundaries blur and your reality becomes distorted. But when you're truly done playing, you begin to see the whole architecture. You stop listening with your ears and start listening with awareness. You notice their behavior follows a fixed pattern. Every word serves one of 4 hidden goals: control, approval, validation, and attention. Kava. Once you see the motive, their tactics lose power. You're no longer confused by what they say, because you understand it's just a strategy to hijack your emotions. This understanding changes everything. You stop asking, why are they doing this? And start asking, what emotion are they trying to make me feel right now? The very moment you shift from reacting to observing, you step out of the game. From a psychological point of view, that's called detachment, healthy emotional separation. You still hear them, see them, and even respond if needed, but you're no longer in it. You become the observer of a play you used to star in. You stop trying to win or lose. You simply choose not to perform anymore. The fascinating thing is, once you stop reacting, the entire game collapses. The narcissist doesn't know what to do when there's no emotional fuel to burn. They might lash out, play the victim, or disappear into silence, all just to see if you'll step back onto the board. But if you stay calm, they start to feel the one thing they fear most: a total loss of control. Understanding the game doesn't make you cold, it makes you free. Free from the need to prove, to fix, to make them understand, or to carry the weight of emotions they can't manage. When you see the machinery behind their manipulation, you no longer need to win, because you've already walked away from the game. And that's when you're ready for the next stage, learning to communicate in the language of true strength, a language that no longer comes from fear, but from sovereignty and peace. Once you understand the game, the next step isn't to stay silent forever. It's to learn how to speak again, but in a completely different language. Not the language of emotional weakness, not the language of fear or the need to be understood, but the language of self-mastery. To a narcissist, every conversation is a psychological experiment. They don't talk to share, they talk to test how easily you can still be influenced. They don't listen to understand, they listen to find your emotional vulnerabilities. That's why true power in communication isn't in your words, it's in the energy behind them. When you speak with calm, clarity, and steadiness, they lose their footing, because narcissists only know how to manipulate those who react. But you no longer react, You reflect. The first principle is mirror their intention, not their action. If they attack you, look deeper to see the motive. Behind every criticism lies fear. Fear of losing control, of being forgotten, of feeling inferior. When you recognize that, you don't need to fight back. You can respond softly but firmly. I understand that you're feeling stressed about this, but I'm not going to participate in this kind of conversation. This response mirrors their intention while protecting your boundaries. You see their fear, but you don't let it invade your emotional space. The second principle is silent reflection. When they try to force a reaction out of you, pause. A few seconds of silence can completely throw them off balance. Narcissists rely on speed. They need quick emotional feedback to stay in control. Your silence makes them confront themselves, and that discomfort is far more powerful than any argument. The third principle, label the behavior calmly. You don't accuse, you simply name what's happening. It seems like you're trying to make me feel guilty, aren't you? This tone is neutral yet sharp. It exposes them without giving them room to play the victim. Your calm voice forces them to face a truth they usually run from. Next comes reframe the manipulation. Redefine their distorted message into honest communication. If they say, "You're so selfish, you only think about yourself," you can reply, "It sounds like you're hoping I could spend more time with you, is that right?" This takes back control of the dialogue, forcing them to express their real intent instead of hiding behind blame. The final principle is use the language of choice. Instead of letting them dictate the pace, you offer two options, both of which protect your boundaries. We can talk about this later when we're both calm, or we can end the conversation here. Which would you prefer? By doing this, you're not resisting, you're leading. You make them feel like they have a choice, while in truth, you've already framed the entire interaction. The language of power isn't loud, it lives in your tone. Steady, low, composed. It shows in your eyes. Calm but unyielding. It breathes in your silence. You don't need to speak much, you just need to be present. And your presence alone dismantles the emotional grip they once had over you. When you speak less, you listen more. When you stop reacting, you see deeper. And when you speak from awareness, you train your mind to understand something profound, that you no longer communicate to be loved, but to be real. That is the essence of the language of power. It doesn't come from words, but from the energy of someone who finally knows they are no longer prey. Because once you speak with calm authority, the narcissist can no longer read you. They lose their map, they lose access, and what's left is only them, exposed, directionless, and terrified in the face of the serenity they can no longer shatter. After you've understood the game and learned to speak in the language of power, you come to realize something even more important than words themselves. Emotional control is the strongest response you can ever give. The narcissist isn't afraid of your silence. They're afraid of what's inside it, self-control. They survive by feeding on emotional reactions. When you get angry, when you explain, when you cry, they feel significant again. But when you're calm, when your eyes don't flicker, when your voice no longer trembles with fear, they feel as though their lifeline has been cut off. In psychology, this is called narcissistic supply collapse, the breakdown of their emotional fuel source. A narcissist can handle being hated, criticized, or even confronted, but what they can't handle is being shut out from your emotional world. When you stop reacting, they simply don't know what to do. So they provoke. They recreate conflict. They say things that make you want to defend yourself or feel guilty. But when you've reached true composure, you begin to see clearly. They're not trying to have a conversation. They're trying to trigger emotion, to prove they still have influence. And in that moment, you always have two choices: react or observe. Reaction is the old pattern, observation is the new one. When you choose to observe, you begin to see their entire mechanism at work. Like watching a play you already know by heart. You can predict when they'll switch from victim to aggressor, when they'll fake pain to manipulate sympathy. And most importantly, you realize you no longer have to play the role of their healer. Emotional control doesn't mean you've become numb. It means you no longer let others dictate the contents of your mind. You can still feel sadness, disappointment, or compassion, but you don't let those emotions drive your actions. You stop at awareness instead of reaction. You breathe, recognize, and let go. The more you practice this, the clearer it becomes. Silence isn't avoidance, it's strategy. Silence is the thin air that the narcissist's ego can't breathe in, because they only know how to exist in noise. The noise of drama, arguments, chaos, and attention. When you enter the realm of stillness, you force them to face the void they've been running from. They're not afraid of you leaving, they're afraid of you being peaceful when you leave. Because peace is the proof that they no longer control you. And that realization is what breaks them the most. When you maintain your calm, you're delivering a message without words. I see you clearly, but I don't hate you. I just no longer allow you access to my mind. That message, your absolute calm, is more powerful than any accusation or argument. It not only strips them of control, but also restores your sovereignty over your own life. This is the pinnacle of recovery, when you no longer need to win the conversation because you've already won within. When you no longer have to say, I'm strong, because your peace says it for you. And it's here that you realize a profound truth. Every battle with a narcissist ends, not with conquest, but with conscious withdrawal. When you stop being emotionally shaken, they lose their power. When you remain still, you don't just control your emotions, you control the entire energetic field of the interaction. That is the real reply, not spoken words, but the calm presence of someone who finally understands. You can't manipulate someone who no longer needs you to feel safe. Once you've understood the game, learned the language of power, and mastered your emotions, you realize that the ultimate goal was never to handle the narcissist. The real goal has always been to reclaim your voice, your identity, and your presence. The parts of yourself you unconsciously lost along the way. During the manipulation, your voice was slowly suffocated. You hesitated before speaking, afraid to upset them, afraid to be misunderstood, afraid to be abandoned. You measured every word, every gesture, just to keep things peaceful. But that kind of peace came at the cost of your own self-destruction. It made you forget what you truly wanted, what you believed in, and how you actually felt. And then one day, when you stop reacting, when you're no longer ruled by their emotions, you start to hear your own voice again. At first, it's faint, like a distant echo in your mind, but the quieter you become, the clearer it sounds. It's the same voice that once got buried under fear, yet it never disappeared. It's been waiting patiently for you to listen. Reclaiming your voice doesn't mean shouting, confronting, or proving anything. On the contrary, it is the deepest act of calm power. You start saying small but honest things like, I don't agree. I'm not comfortable with this. I need time to think. Those simple sentences are the true milestones of freedom because they mark the moment you stop reacting and start choosing. Reclaiming your voice also means you no longer speak to be accepted, you speak to affirm your existence. You no longer seek their approval because you've already given yourself your own validation, and then something miraculous happens. When you stop needing to be acknowledged, you finally begin to feel genuine respect, not from them, but from yourself. When you speak with truth, free of resentment, free of fear, free of the need to be heard, you send out a completely different energy. It's quiet yet powerful. It doesn't need to win, yet it cannot be defeated. That is the language of someone who has matured through pain. From this point on, you'll notice changes in every interaction. You don't need to talk much because you understand that silence is also communication. You don't need to prove yourself because your worth no longer depends on anyone's reaction. You don't speak to be loved, you speak to be real. The voice you reclaim no longer trembles like before. It's calm, steady, and deliberate, because behind it there's no longer fear of rejection, only wholeness. And when you speak from that place, you're no longer anyone's victim. You're the one in charge of your choices. Remember this, a narcissist can imitate your tone, your words, even your emotions, but they can never copy the frequency of peace inside you. That's something untouchable, because it doesn't come from the outside. It comes from knowing who you truly are. When you reclaim your voice, you don't just speak differently, you live differently, you choose differently, you love differently, you listen differently. You no longer need to fight for freedom, because freedom now lives in how you show up, how you see the world, and how you speak truth without fearing who might leave. And that is the real end of the game, not when they fall silent, but when you no longer need to speak just to prove anything. Because when you've reclaimed your voice, even your softest words carry the strength of someone who has finally come home to themselves.